Welcome to the first lecture for Introduction to Worship, Part 1. I am Dr. Shade, and I will be your host for this whirlwind tour through the fascinating realm of ritual and worship. Remember to take notes during this lecture because there will be a test at the end of the week to make sure you've understood the basic terms and concepts here. Those terms and ideas will be ritual, symbol and myth, sacred and profane, and ways to understand and analyze rituals, symbols, and myths. One of the things you'll hear people bemoan these days is the decline of the Christian church and the diminishing numbers of people in the worship services. The growing numbers of people claiming to be nuns when asked their religion, and the increase in people claiming to be atheists, might seem to indicate that religion is not something innate to humanity, and that it is certainly not universal. However, many scholars of religion make the case that religion is indeed universal, that human beings have an innate need to engage with an alternative reality, a true meaning of existence, a ground of being, or an ultimate truth. Mircea Eliade, for example, who was a key figure in establishing the study of religion as an academic discipline in the U.S., said that the intuition of the sacred is universal, and that there is a recurrence of symbols, myths, and rituals across history and cultures. Traditionally, it has been religion that enables this experience of the sacred. But as we noted, old traditions and certainties are challenged at every turn, to the point where what we used to hold as central in our lives, both individually and collectively, can be shaken to its core. But I will make the case that religion and the need for ritual is part of who we are as homo religiosus, religious human beings. This need may manifest itself in ways radically different than what we have known, and as Christians we may cringe at the ways in which people look to modern-day gods, such as nationalism or sports or social media, to fulfill this need. But if we are to be leaders of Christian church worship, it is important that we have a basic understanding of the origins of ritual and worship so that we can think about what's going on in our congregations in an objective way. That way, when we look at Christian worship, we'll have at least a foundational understanding of what it is that drives human beings to build these churches and erect these altars and hand out these little wafers of bread and reverence these crosses. Mallory Nye, founding editor of the journal Culture and Religion and author of the book Religion, the Basics, reminds us that religion is not just something mystical and detached from the human sphere. Religion is something that people do and how they talk about what they do. And it is ritual that provides the means by which religion is done. So let's talk a little about what ritual is. Ritual comes from the word ritus in Latin, which means religious usage. Rites are ceremonial actions or observances and can be done in both religious and secular settings. Interestingly, ethnologists, which are scientists who study animals in their natural habitats, have even observed animals initiating and taking part in what appear to be rituals. Elephants, chimpanzees, gorillas, giraffes, magpies and crows, dolphins, and even the western scrub jay, to name a few, have all been observed in what appear to be ritualistic customs, especially when it comes to the death of one of their own. Some species of birds and animals have complex social behaviors that manifest themselves in unique ways. Humans, too, are mammals, and one of the most socially complex of all. So having rites and customs is, in some ways, part of what it means to be a social animal. But of course, it's important to recognize that not all rituals are religious. You may put your shoes on your feet in a very specific place, in a very specific way, at a very specific time every morning, but that does not necessarily mean you are performing a religious act. Unless, of course, you do indeed worship at the altar of the shoe god, and this is part of a prescribed rubric of worship for you and your shoe cult. No, we're talking about religious rituals. And they are the things that people do, actions they perform, particular types of behavior conducted in certain ways that enable them to transcend the ordinary and enter into the realm of the divine. Catherine Bell states that ritualization is a matter of various culturally specific strategies for setting some activities off from others, for creating and privileging a qualitative distinction between the sacred and the profane, and for ascribing such distinctions to realities thought to transcend the powers of human actors. Now that's a mouthful, but basically we're saying that rituals have meaning, and those taking part in the ritual actions should try to understand that meaning. So let's pause here to focus on these terms, sacred and profane. Sacred comes from the word sacre, which means to set apart. In German, ganz andere, completely different, wholly other. The sacred is something powerful. It is the really real of reality. And the sacred exists beyond time and place, but at the same time also manifests within time and place. The opposite of sacred is profane. It's where we get the word profanity, low, rough speech. It's just everyday, ordinary life. The profane is just something that is what it is, and it has no other meaning attached to it. But just about anything profane, any person, any story, any image, has the potential to become sacred if so discerned by the community. Eliade said that the sacred is what bridges the divine with the ordinary. He defined the sacred as the source of significance, meaning, power, and being, manifesting in three distinct forms. Hierophanies, which are physical representations of the holy. Cratiophanies, which are physical representations of power. And ontophanies, physical representations of being. Let's take a moment to focus on each one of these categories. Hierophany, the physical representation of the holy, comes from the Greek word hieros, which means sacred or holy, and the verb phainein, which means to reveal or bring to light. In 2015, I was one of the presenters at the Parliament of World Religions, and there was this huge hall where an artist made banners with representations of the symbols that captured the essence of all the different world religions. And here you can see a sample of some of those artistic works. Here are some more, where you can see in these symbols, in these images, these are representations of the holy for that particular religion. Christians, too, have symbols that are hierophanies. This was the Good Friday service from my former church, where the youth made banners and did sermons. And you can see here, these representations, these artistic representations of the holy. So you have the Madonna and Child, and on this side you've got the cross. These are symbols that represent God and the holy manifest in our time and place. Kratophany is a representation of power. It comes from kratos in Greek, which means power, and again phanein, which means to reveal. You can see it especially in the images that represent the axis mundi, which means the center post of the world. And these are places that are believed to be manifestations of the divine in an actual sacred space. So you have Jacob's ladder, for instance, where the place that he had the dream of the angels ascending and descending to heaven, he marked as a sacred space. The stone that he laid on, he anointed, and that became Beth El, the house of God. That was the axis mundi. And for Christians, the cross is that. And here you see an artistic representation that combines both the cross and the tree of life, which you see over on the left-hand side, the center post of the world. Ontophony is a physical representation of being or reality. It comes from the Greek word ont, which means being, and again, phanein in Greek means to reveal. Eliade said that the habitation always undergoes a process of sanctification because it constitutes an imago mundi, which means image of the world, microcosm of the world, and the world is a divine creation. So in this way, the original appearance of the holy, the hierophany, yields an order of social existence, ontophony, a physical representation of being. And here you see at the Parliament of World Religions, the Buddhist monks created a mandala, which is for them an image of the world. It's an imago mundi. And the interesting thing about this artistic work is it is all made of grains of sand. And the Buddhist monks painstakingly put all of the sand in these different places and created this beautiful mandala. It took them like 6 days to do this. And you know what happened at the end of it? They blew all of the sand away to represent that all of reality is fleeting. Christians too have ontophony. This is a picture of a Gothic cathedral. Notice how the ceiling gives you a sense of being lifted up to heaven. And at the center of it all, of course, is the altar and the host. So the sanctuary itself is to be a physical representation of what God intended for the world. So you have this sense of the divine as you walk into these churches. Here is another ontophony. This is a sort of a thought experiment that was designed by a fellow student of mine in seminary and myself, and we called it Living Water Lutheran Church. And we wanted to move away from the hierarchy of the architecture in the traditional Gothic church, and this one we made to represent the womb. And when you look at the actual inside of the sanctuary, you can see how there is water that flows down from the cross, and then it flows out into a community garden. And so it's supposed to represent the way in which the divine and the world are connected at even the most basic level of ecology. So you have this sort of flowing water from the source, from God, from the cross, and being circulated into the world. So it works on many different symbolic levels. Later in the course, I'm going to ask you to take a short video of your church sanctuary to give us a tour of that sacred space. Think about what is sacred in your church. The altar, the font, the bread and wine, the Bible, the story of the resurrection, the person of Jesus. They are just ordinary things, but are infused with extraordinary meaning. Which is why, by the way, when you encounter conflicts in the church over things that you think are silly, like what color the carpet should be, or things that you think should be non-negotiables, like, of course, the American flag does not belong in the chancel area of the sanctuary. Well, it's important to keep in mind that people might be attaching sacred significance to something, even if they're not aware of it. How you manage and negotiate with that topic is for another class, but it's something to be aware of. Remember that anything we do that is profane in everyday life can take on sacred significance in the sanctuary. How you walk, how you talk and hold your body, even how you shake a hand. These are all elevated in the midst of a worship service. Which is why, by the way, you may find yourself being scrutinized when performing these actions. People are trying to get a feel for whether or not the actions being performed are done with reverence for the holy in our midst. Eliade pointed out that even archaic humans divided the world into sacred and profane. We can see it in their drawings and in their figurines, in their burial sites, and in their homes, that they sought to live in the sacred world and found ways to do this through symbol and ritual. Eliade defined religion as the sacred, as expressed through symbol and myth. For Eliade, religion is the human response to the sacred, as expressed through enduring images and symbols shared across time and space. Now let's focus our attention on symbols. Here you can see that nearly every religion has some kind of symbol associated with it. In many of these, they are just ordinary things, like, say, the lotus flower, that take on sacred significance. We also see it in the symbols of our nation. Every nation has certain symbols that mean more than their actual everyday appearance. I had a class on Introduction to Religion, and the students there insisted that the internet and social media is becoming a new religion. And I asked them, well, what's the symbol of it? And they said, it is the Wi-Fi signal. Symbols are physical objects that are understood to have a particular meaning or meanings associated with them that goes beyond their obvious physical properties. So like I said, any profane thing can become a symbol. You look at the cross, and it's basically two pieces of wood, the most ordinary things you can think of. But when it connects with the story of what happened to Jesus, then that cross is elevated to the level of symbol. It is an infusion of the sacred into a natural object. It's what Eliade called the dialectic of the sacred. There's a conversation that goes on between the sacred and the profane, between the divine and the human, that is mediated through this symbol. Myths, then, are symbols in narrative form. It is a story we tell that points to a greater meaning than just the plot. It is a sequence of images put into the shape of a story. For example, just about every religion, every culture has myths. The ancient Egyptians had their mythology. The ancient Greeks had stories that they would tell that had both symbol and plot fused together to create a myth. Christians too, and Jews, all have myths. Eliade wrote about the myth of the cosmic return, for example, which we find in many different religions. Humanity longs to return to the Garden of Eden, for instance. And it is to these myths and symbols that we will return in the next lectures on Christian worship, as well as sacred space and sacred actions and sacred time. It's important to note that some people think that myth is just an untruth, a made-up story. This is not necessarily the case. In the context of religious studies, a myth is a narrative that conveys a larger truth, a deeper truth, whether or not the details of the story are true. Those details may in fact be untrue. They may not be factual, but they still contain truth with a capital T. Now we're going to talk a little bit about archetypes, which are associated with myths and symbols. Carl Jung said that archetypes are fundamental symbols with meanings and associations that transcend time and culture. You can find archetypes as people: the king, the queen, the mother, father, trickster, virgin, crone, the wise old man, the prince. And you can see in Christianity, we have these archetypes. They also come to us in the form of images: sky, the sun and moon, water, earth. Symbols and myths are always extending themselves out, like when the village tree becomes the axis mundi. And if you're wondering, well, where do we see these archetypes in popular culture? You can see them in tarot cards. If you've ever seen a deck, they have these images, which are really archetypes. And the belief is that if you deal the cards, then they're going to predict the future or reveal some kind of truth that can be discerned from interpreting the symbols and the order in which those symbols come and the dealing of the cards. But they have all of these archetypal images. Christianity too has these symbols that are archetypal. And this gets to the convergence theory and symbols. So water becomes the archetypal movement from chaos to order, from pollution to purity, from barrenness to renewal. You can see that in baptism. And the stone serves as the archetypal expression of the non-changing, impermeable nature of the sacred. So when we talk about God as the rock, then we can see that archetypal symbolism coming into play. Symbolic thinking must display two dimensions or features, says Eliade: structural and valuation. So structural is how a symbol organizes elements of reality into a system. And valuation is how symbols are granted worth within reality. So not all symbols are equal. When you look at the symbols of Christianity, for example, the cross, of course, is the structural symbol. Everything, in many ways, revolves around that. And there are other symbols that we have in the church, but they're not quite as important as the cross. So, for example, the the shepherd's crook, or the candle, or the dove, or the crown. These are all important symbols, but they're not as important as the cross. In terms of the structural dimension of symbols, Eliade points out that no symbol exists in isolation, and symbols connect with other images to fashion and extend the idea of the sacred. So, for example, with Egyptian mythology, the sun god yields the symbol of the solar disk, and you can find that symbol carved on walls and in jewelry and taken out on certain festival days. In this manner, the sacred is extended from its initial appearance. In terms of the valuation dimension of symbols, Eliade believed that some symbol systems, some images, myths, and structures are superior to others. He thought the bigger is better. The more complex the symbol system, the more universal it must be. For instance, Christian mythology incorporates numerous symbol systems all at the same time. Water, wine, Son of God, cosmic tree, the cross. So Eliade believed that Christianity would be a more superior religion than compared to, say, some other more basic tribal religions. Other religious theorists have taken him to task on this and have warned against thinking that Christianity is superior in a sense that it should go around and, start massacring other people who do not believe in Christianity. But just in terms of the way in which the complexity of the symbols come together, Eliade noted that Christianity has many different layers to it. This is the end of the first part of the Introduction to Ritual and Worship. Go on to part 2, where we'll talk about ways of looking at rituals.